It started like any other late-night interview. The curtains drew back, the lights dimmed to a soft glow, and Stephen Colbert's signature smirk lit up the set of The Late Show. The audience clapped as Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, walked out wearing a confident smile and a conservative navy dress. At 27, she had already become a political lightning rod, known for her sharp messaging and unshakable composure during high-stakes press briefings. Colbert greeted her with a handshake that felt, to many watching, just a little too tight. The energy was civil at first, the usual banter about politics, youth in government, and the changing face of Washington. But underneath the practiced jokes, there was a tension. Viewers noticed Colbert interrupting more often than usual, his eyebrow arching slightly every time Leavitt referred to faith, values, or traditional American principles. Then it happened. The moment that would ignite social media into a frenzy and dominate headlines the next morning. "So, Karoline," Colbert said, casually adjusting his tie, "you often talk about your faith, how it's at the center of who you are. But don't you think there's something convenient about how your deeply publicized Christianity lines up with your support for a man like Donald Trump? You're using religion not as a compass, but as a cudgel. I mean, come on. Isn't this just an elaborate marketing campaign to baptize Trumpism for the American people?" The crowd fell silent. The smirk on Colbert's face quickly turned into something sharper, a smirk with teeth. Karoline blinked once, then twice. Her jaw tightened. "Excuse me," she asked, trying to keep her voice even. Stephen leaned back, crossing his legs. "I mean, isn't it just a little too perfect? This whole Jesus and MAGA aesthetic. You stand at the podium, quote scripture, and then defend policies that many Christians, real Christians, might find troubling. It feels less like belief, more like psychological manipulation." Leavitt's eyes narrowed. "That's not only false, it's grotesquely insulting." "Is it?" Colbert shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to wrap an administration, one riddled with moral compromise, in the language of sanctity. I find that dangerous, and frankly, dishonest." Gasps erupted from the audience. You could feel the air thicken in the room. Leavitt's voice sharpened. "I don't need to defend my faith to a late-night comedian." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm not asking you to defend your faith, Karoline. I'm asking you to explain why you've weaponized it." The word weaponized echoed like a shot across the studio. Karoline straightened in her chair, but her fingers gripped the edge of the armrest. "My faith is not a weapon. It's not a slogan. It's not some gimmick to pander to voters. It's who I am. It's why I get out of bed in the morning and serve this country with every ounce of strength I have." Stephen shrugged. "And yet somehow it always seems to come up when you're defending the indefensible." The camera cut briefly to the audience. Some looked shocked, others leaned forward, hungry for more. On Twitter, the clip was already trending under Colbert vs. Leavitt. "I don't know what's more offensive," Karoline said slowly. "The idea that you think a person of faith can't serve in government without being accused of manipulation, or that you believe you can judge the authenticity of someone's spiritual life from a talk show desk." But Colbert wasn't done. He was leaning in now, voice rising slightly. "You know, we've seen this before. Politicians hiding behind scripture to justify wars, laws, entire campaigns of discrimination. What makes this any different? When you stand at the podium and cite Corinthians while spinning the latest controversy, you're not preaching. You're laundering morality to keep a movement afloat." Karoline's lips parted, but no sound came. Her composure cracked for just a second. "You don't know me," she finally said, voice tighter now. "You don't know what I've lived through, what my faith actually means to me. But it's real. It's realer than this stage, or the applause of this audience." Stephen tilted his head, visibly amused. "Then tell us what makes it real, Karoline. Because right now, to many people watching, It looks like you're just putting on a very expensive mask." She opened her mouth again but stopped. For a moment, the lights seemed to dim a little. The studio's silence was unbearable. Colbert leaned back in triumph, sipping from his mug. The moment felt final, like a courtroom verdict had been handed down. The audience, unsure whether to cheer or cringe, waited. And then, Karoline exhaled. "I'll tell you," she said. Stephen looked surprised. "I'll tell you what makes it real." She wasn't smiling now. Her voice was low, but it had a steel core. And in that single sentence, it was clear. This wasn't over. Karoline leaned forward now, no longer retreating. Her voice, low and unwavering, cut through the silence like a blade. "You want to know what makes it real, Stephen? Fine, let's go there." Colbert, briefly taken aback, tried to recover with a smirk. "I'm listening." "You think I've weaponized my faith," she said, each syllable deliberate. "You think quoting the Bible at a press briefing is some kind of play for votes, a trick to get people to support Donald Trump. That I'm brainwashing Americans. Do you have any idea how arrogant that sounds?" Stephen shifted in his chair, expression hardening. "I think it sounds like an honest question." "No," Karoline snapped. "It sounds like an accusation, and a deeply offensive one, because it doesn't stop with me, Stephen. You're not just accusing me. You're accusing every person out there who clings to faith, not because it's convenient, not because it's politically advantageous, but because it's the only thing that got them through the darkest moments of their lives." The studio was dead quiet. "I grew up in a small town," she continued, voice rising now, eyes locked on his. "I come from a working-class family. My parents are devout, humble, and they raised me to believe that God was not just some distant figure in the sky, but a presence that walks beside you when everything else falls apart. My mom had breast cancer when I was 13. My father lost his job. We were drowning. And every night, we would kneel at the side of my bed and pray. Not because we were trying to manipulate the American people into believing something, but because we needed something bigger than us to hold on to." Colbert tried to cut in. "Karoline—" "No," she said, cutting him off. "Let me finish. You don't get to throw out a nuclear accusation and then pivot when it gets uncomfortable." She inhaled, visibly holding back emotion. "You look at someone like me and see a talking point. You hear the words Jesus or faith, and you assume it's political theater. You think I'm some kind of puppet, reading scripture to hypnotize voters into backing an administration you despise. But the truth is, I am that girl on her knees, begging God to let her mom live. I am that teenager who stayed up at night, reading Psalms because I thought it might be the only thing keeping my family together. And you don't get to erase that because you want to score a viral moment." The camera panned to the audience. Some were tearing up. Others sat in frozen silence, as if afraid to move. Colbert, still holding his mug, put it down slowly. "Karoline, I'm not saying you don't believe what you say. I'm saying that once you put it into the political arena, it's fair game. When you invoke religion to justify the actions of one of the most divisive presidents in modern history, people have a right to question why." Karoline's hands trembled slightly in her lap, but her voice didn't falter. "And I'm telling you that it's not your place to decide whether my faith is valid based on who I vote for. You can challenge policies. You can disagree with decisions. But when you imply that I'm manipulating millions by pretending to be a Christian, that's not journalism. That's character assassination." Colbert didn't flinch. "It's not about you. It's about what you represent. A public official standing behind a podium, using sacred language to justify a political movement. A movement that's torn families apart, demonized the press, and weaponized nationalism." "Don't lecture me on torn families," Karoline snapped. "I've seen families torn apart by addiction, poverty, and violence long before I ever stepped foot in Washington. And you know what? The one thing that kept mine together that kept me together, was my faith. So no, I won't apologize for bringing it with me into public service." Colbert leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You didn't just bring it. You built your whole brand on it. You're not just a press secretary, you're a symbol, and symbols are meant to be scrutinized. Then scrutinize my policies, my words, my decisions," she fired back. "But don't come after my soul." There was a pause. Long. Tense. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or wait. Colbert leaned back, the silence stretching just a little too long before he broke it with a flat, "Well, that's very moving." Karoline's eyes flashed. "You think this is a performance?" He shrugged. "I think it's convenient. That's all." That word again, convenient, seemed to slap the air out of her lungs. She blinked rapidly, then sat back slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "You know," she said, quieter now, "I came on this show because I thought there was a chance to have a real conversation. I thought maybe you wanted to understand someone different from you. But what I've learned in the last 10 minutes is that you don't want understanding. You want a villain." Colbert's response was clipped. "I want accountability." "Accountability," she repeated bitterly. "Right. And to you that means branding someone like me a fraud because my beliefs don't align with your worldview. You don't want to talk about policy. You want to dismantle my identity in front of a live audience." The camera cut again to the crowd. Uneasy glances, murmurs, tension thick enough to taste. Colbert's voice dropped a register. "Karoline, I think the real question is this. Are you willing to admit that tying your faith so tightly to Trump is dangerous? That it may alienate people who don't share your religion? That it blurs the line between governance and theocracy?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked away, visibly trying to hold herself together. Her fingers brushed away, something near the corner of her eye. Not a performance, a moment. And when she looked back, her voice cracked ever so slightly. "I think the real danger is people like you telling people like me that we don't belong in the public square unless we silence the part of ourselves that gives us strength." Colbert opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. "I'm not finished." And with that, Karoline Leavitt once again took control of the moment. She sat upright, her voice trembling but firm, each word slicing through the thick tension that clung to the studio like fog. "You invited me here tonight under the pretense of conversation. And I accepted because, despite our differences, I respect the importance of dialogue. But what I walked into isn't a conversation. It's a trap laced with cynicism, wrapped in applause, and disguised as satire." Colbert, arms crossed now, leaned back in his chair and let out a short breath through his nose, a half-laugh, barely concealing his irritation. "Karoline, it's not a trap. It's an interview. This is what the public deserves. Real questions, real scrutiny. You're the White House press secretary. You're the face of an administration. If you can't handle this, I can handle it," she shot back before he could finish, her voice rising just above his. "That's not the issue. I've handled harder questions from hostile press pools, from seasoned journalists who challenge me on facts and policy. But this?" She gestured broadly around the room, to the audience, to the cameras. "This isn't journalism. This is theater. You've created a stage where your guests don't walk in for discourse. They walk in for demolition." Stephen opened his mouth to reply, but she cut him off again. "You wanted to break me down, Stephen. You wanted me to fold. You thought I'd smile, play along with the jokes, and laugh while you slowly chipped away at my character under the pretense of comedy. But here's what you didn't expect. Resistance. You didn't expect that I'd push back, or that I might actually have something real to say, something that wasn't rehearsed, something that wasn't cleared by a team of advisors, something human." The audience, usually lively and reactive, was dead quiet now. Colbert's expression hardened. His fingers tapped against his desk rhythmically, a silent metronome to the rising tempo of the confrontation. "I did expect pushback," he finally said. "I just didn't expect deflection." Karoline narrowed her eyes. "Deflection?" He nodded. "You've spent 10 minutes making this about you, about how hurt you are, instead of addressing the real concern, your role in wrapping this administration in the language of righteousness. When you're at that podium, Karoline, you aren't just a woman of faith. You're the mouthpiece of a political machine, and that machine has done real harm." "That's easy to say when you're not the one standing under the spotlight every day, Stephen," she shot back. "It's easy to pontificate from behind a desk, with a studio audience and a laugh track. But I'm the one who has to look into the cameras and communicate with a nation in pain. And yes, I invoke my faith, because it's part of who I am. Because millions of Americans out there feel ignored, judged, and abandoned. And faith is often the only thing they have left." Colbert leaned in now, eyes fixed on her. "But do you ever consider that your faith isn't everyone's? That using it so prominently in your official role might feel exclusionary to Americans of other beliefs? Or no belief at all?" Karoline nodded, her tone softening for the first time. "Of course I consider that. I don't expect everyone to share my beliefs, but I do expect them to respect that mine are sincere, and I refuse to hide them just to make other people comfortable. That's not inclusion. That's censorship." "Censorship?" Colbert echoed, incredulous. "No one's censoring you, Karoline. You're one of the most visible voices in politics right now. You're not being silenced. You're being questioned. Then question the policies. Question the messaging. Question the decisions made at the highest levels of government. But don't stand here and tell me I'm brainwashing people by expressing the beliefs that carried me through my lowest moments. That's not a question. That's an insult." Colbert's jaw clenched. There was a pause, one of those long, uncomfortable ones where the cameras almost seem unsure if they should keep rolling. "You brought up my faith to make a point about Trump," she said, quieter now. "But let me ask you something, Stephen. Do you believe people of faith don't have a place in politics? That we can't serve without being reduced to stereotypes or accused of ulterior motives?" Colbert didn't answer. Karoline pressed. "Because what you're doing, it's not just about me. It's a warning to every young Christian watching this show. Hide who you are, or we'll make a mockery of you on national television." "You think that's progress?" Colbert shifted. "What I think," he said slowly, "is that the fusion of religion and politics, especially the kind we've seen in this administration, is corrosive. It makes compromise impossible. It replaces civic dialogue with moral absolutism. And it breeds division, not unity." "I don't disagree," Karoline said, surprising him. "I don't believe in turning pulpits into podiums. But you don't get to accuse me of doing that just because I speak from a place of conviction. My religion doesn't dictate policy. It grounds my perspective. It reminds me to treat people with dignity, even when they don't treat me the same way." She paused, voice thickening again. "Even now." Stephen's face softened just slightly. It was the first sign of recognition in nearly 20 minutes. Karoline took a breath, but this one wavered. Her hands were clasped tightly now in her lap. "You think you're holding me accountable, but you're not. You're punishing me for being too open, for speaking too plainly, for not laughing it off when you turned something sacred into a joke." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She let it fall. "I've been mocked before," she said, her voice trembling. "Online, in print, in interviews like this. But somehow this hurts more, because I came here thinking maybe we could find common ground, that even if we didn't agree, we could see each other's humanity. But I don't think you came here to see mine. I think you came here to bury it." A stunned silence followed, the kind that hangs in the air like smoke after an explosion. Colbert looked down at his desk, then up again, visibly thrown off. "Caroline, But it was too late. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor, and the audience, unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath, simply watched. Caroline stood at the edge of the stage, framed in the glow of studio lights that now seemed far too bright, far too artificial. Her face, once composed and polished for television, was raw, eyes glistening, jaw clenched, spine stiff with restraint. She took one shaky breath, another, but didn't sit back down. The chair remained behind her, empty, the unspoken symbol of a conversation that had veered far from its intended path. Stephen Colbert watched her carefully, hands now still on the desk, his showman's armor showing cracks. For once, the clever retort wasn't ready. The script had been shattered. "I came here tonight to talk about the future," Caroline said, her voice steadier now, as though the tears had cleared the smoke from her lungs. "To talk about what it means to be a young person in politics, to be a woman navigating a world that wasn't built for us, to be someone of faith in a culture that treats belief like a punchline. I didn't come here to be judged. I didn't come here to be dissected." The audience remained frozen. One camera zoomed in slowly, capturing the emotion as her words rang out like an echo through the studio. "You know what the hardest part of my job is?" she asked, her voice dropping just enough to force the room to lean in. "It's not the press briefings. It's not the media spin, the viral clips, or the headlines. It's standing up every day in front of people who don't see a human being, who don't hear my words, only what they expect me to say, who've already decided what I must be because of the party I serve or the God I pray to." Colbert opened his mouth slightly as if to interrupt, but something in her stare warned him not to. "I've been called a puppet, a sellout, a robot. I've been told I'm too young to lead, too emotional to be trusted, too religious to be rational. But tonight, on this stage, you added something new. You accused me of using my faith like a weapon, as if I hold up the Bible not to guide my path, but to blind the people watching." She paused, letting the weight of that settle over him. "That's not just insulting. That's dangerous." A faint murmur moved through the crowd. Even the most skeptical among them were now sitting straighter in their seats. "My faith doesn't make me perfect. It makes me try, every day. It made me apologize to a friend I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. It made me forgive my father for the things he said when he was angry and scared and unemployed. It made me walk into rooms full of people who hated me and choose grace over vengeance. You may not like the president I serve. You may not like the administration I represent. But don't you ever mistake my faith for a marketing tool." Her voice broke again, just for a moment. "I don't carry it like a sword," she said, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "I carry it like a shield. Because in this world sometimes that's all you have, and I will never apologize for that." A hush, electric and alive, crackled through the room. Stephen, still silent, lowered his eyes for a moment. When he looked up, the smugness had drained from his face. What replaced it wasn't quite remorse, but it wasn't mockery either. It was something quieter, uneasier. The realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far. He leaned forward, microphone, catching the soft shift in his voice. "Caroline, I never meant to question your pain." "But you did," she replied firmly. "And that's why I'm done." She turned from him then, not with haste or fury, but with conviction. The heels of her shoes clicked steadily across the stage, deliberate and unshaken. A single cameraman instinctively followed her movement, unsure if the moment was real or rehearsed. It was very real. Stephen stood halfway as if to speak, but the words died in his throat. Whether it was guilt, or pride, or simply an understanding that nothing he said now would fix what had already unfolded, he didn't call out to her. He sat back down as she disappeared off stage. The door closed behind her, and that was it. The audience didn't erupt in applause. They didn't boo. They didn't cheer. They sat in a strange, reverent quiet. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence that comes after something true is spoken aloud in a place built on fiction. Backstage, Karoline passed the production crew without a word. She didn't stop for makeup, didn't glance at the monitors showing live footage of Colbert returning to his monologue with a forced chuckle and a scrambled pivot to the next segment. The words fumbled out of his mouth like puzzle pieces from the wrong box. Across the internet, the moment exploded. Clips of Karoline's emotional speech flooded Twitter, TikTok, YouTube within minutes. Hashtags like "Your Shield Not Sword," "Leavitt vs. Colbert," and "Faith is Not a Fraud" trended at the top of every platform. Supporters and critics alike found themselves grappling with the rawness of what they'd seen. On cable news, talking heads debated the ethics of Colbert's line of questioning. Some called it overdue pushback against religious posturing in politics. Others saw it as a televised ambush, an ugly misuse of platform against a young woman who hadn't come to defend her faith but had been forced to. But beyond the noise, one clip stood out. Karoline, face streaked with tears, declaring that her faith was not a weapon, but a shield. Unrehearsed, unfiltered, unshakable. By the following morning, the official Late Show YouTube upload had garnered over 18 million views. Colbert's team released a carefully worded statement acknowledging the intensity of the exchange and welcoming continued dialogue with guests from all backgrounds. It stopped short of an apology. Karoline Leavitt, however, remained silent. She didn't need to say anything else. The speech had already spoken for her, louder than any press release, more lasting than any rebuttal. It became a moment, the kind that transcends politics, party lines, and punditry. The kind that reminds people, if only briefly, that behind every title is a human being, flawed, faithful, and fierce. And for one unforgettable night, a talk show, built for comedy, became the stage for something profoundly human. Not because of a joke told at someone's expense, but because one woman refused to laugh away her truth.